were handling this shutdown, which was, absolutely devastating for them. And one of the things that struck me was the way that communities were coming together to support their local businesses. So the fact that yarn shops had to shut down, but then they were able to still be selling because people would order by phone or online, and other things, the creative things like the local movie theaters that were selling popcorn curbside to stay open, that kind of thing. So my first line of thought on the book was actually about the idea of shopping local and supporting our small local businesses. So even though it's knitting at home, which, we've all been at home for, God, almost a year now, the concepts originally was about home as in staying local. So once I had that kind of thought in my head, it was like, well, then it really makes sense for me to only work with local dyers. So rather than going to one of the big commercial yarn companies, I thought, well, this is my chance to work with the Oregon dyers. So I started putting out feelers, put out some requests for collaborators, and I got a really nice response. I got quite a few people from the Instagram posts that I made, but then I still had a few more slots to fill in. So I started trolling through Etsy. It turns out that when you go on Etsy and you put in a search, you can do an area search. So I narrowed it down to, I only want to look at yarn from people who are in Oregon. And I found a handful of additional dyers that way, which was really cool because I found dyers that I'd never heard of, and I wouldn't have heard of if I hadn't done that search. So I had this idea that this was going to be about keeping it local. This was all going to be Oregon. And I was trying to figure out how to organize it, how to, where to draw my inspirations from for each design. And, I had some ideas about I could do it based on where they are, the coast and the Eastern Oregon and things like that. But the more I got into it, the more I realized that each design really could just come from the dyer themselves. It could be anything about the dyer. And in some cases, it was kind of literal. And in other cases, it's a little bit more, I don't know, esoteric. I had one dyer I was talking to, this was Fierce Fibers, and we were going back and forth a little bit. I knew approximately where she lived, and I confirmed, I emailed her and said, just confirm this is where you are, because I wanted to put the locations in the book. And she said, yeah, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere, but we have a huge garden and I have chickens. And that was that moment of, aha, I have no idea what I'm designing for you yet, but it needs to be called I Have Chickens. And as it turns out, I ended up designing a cowl that has little eggs on it. So that was the once I got the dyers lined up, the next step was to send out a questionnaire, asked a bunch of things about where they were, what their process was like, where they like to draw inspiration from, whether this was their full-time gig or if they had a day job. And based on that input and based on the yarn that they sent me, so I gave them an opportunity to tell me, do you have a yarn that you'd like to spotlight? What do you love? And I can work with that. And so based on all of that, I was able to create patterns for each individual dyer. With the exception of Silver Falls and Butterfly Farm, who were working together, which gave me an opportunity to do a nice big project. And you'll see that towards the end, where I was able to work with two different yarn dyers, but put their yarns together, which was a lot of fun too. So I think, do you want to do questions now or all at the end?
I was gonna save them for the end. Maybe we could just go through, the book and the patterns and talk about the dyers and talk with the dyers and then circle back.
Okay. So I'm gonna just, since I mentioned it, I will real quick show you. So here's what ended up being I Have Chickens. So I hope you guys can see that. There's little eggs there. Um, and Fierce Fibers is known for their gradients. So of course I wanted to use her gradients. But I told her, here's what I'm thinking. You send me the yarn you love, and this is what she sent me. And I'm really pleased with that pattern. So the first dyer I'm going to talk about, who's going to get to talk for herself, is Mindy of Henley Handmade. And she's one of the dyers that I found on Etsy. And I was really intrigued by her because she does natural dyeing, which is unusual and wonderful. So for her yarn, I knew that since she was putting such an emphasis on using natural dyes and being low impact on the environment, that I wanted to do something nature themed. So for her, I created a hat called Late Harvest, and it ended up being called Late Harvest because I got her yarn in the fall. So I was in that fall mindset, thinking about fall colors. And so here is Late Harvest. Here we go. And I really enjoyed working on this pattern. It's just one giant flower with a couple of leaves. The yarn was really interesting to work with. She sent me a Rambouillet yarn, which I had never worked with before, which was really cool for me to get to try something new. And I really would encourage you, if you're looking for something new, try some different fibers. We all knit with merino every day, but there's a ton of different varieties out there, and they're really interesting to work with. The Rambouillet I found had a sort of a loft to it that was very interesting, and just a tiny bit of stickiness, which sounds bad, but actually was just fine. It helped it kind of hold together as I knit. But it was definitely a very different texture than the merino, and I liked it quite well. So Mindy, if you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about your process, basically anything you want to go ahead and talk about. But one thing I am very interested in hearing from each of you is for me, I had a plan, and the plan went haywire. And so I did something else instead. And I'm kind of curious to hear how other people coped with the lockdown, and what was your silver lining?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, thank you, Teresa, for that nice little introduction. I appreciate that very much. So yeah, I am Mindy, the owner and dyer of Henley Handmade. I naturally dye, as Teresa mentioned, and I naturally dye US farm wool for knitters, primarily for knitters who are looking to minimize their environmental footprint, the eco-conscious knitters. So I dye, with plants, flowers, roots, even some insects to create my dyes, and then use the dye to then dye on wool or yarn that I have sourced from Wyoming, from multi-generational ranches. So my business's biggest goal is minimizing its environmental impact as much as possible. I do this, of course, by using natural dyes and the US yarn, but also in other more subtle ways, like using 100% recycled post-consumer material polymailers and 100% recycled content tissue paper when I wrap up my yarns to ship them. And all the way down to the labels, the yarn labels that you receive with my yarn that have the information on them. I print them on wildflower paper that you can actually plant at home and grow your own wildflower patch. Of course, even if you don't have space in your yard to do that, you could always use a food container, wash it out, put some soil in, and put it in a sunny windowsill, and you could have a little miniature wildflower patch just from the label that came on your yarn. So that's just kind of a fun little a little bonus. But giving back to my community and to the environment is also a priority for my business. For every skein that I sell, I donate $2, $1 to Harmony Farm Sanctuary, which is a local farm animal sanctuary or rescue and rehabilitation center. It's in Sisters, Oregon. And another dollar plants a tree through onetreeplanted.org. So I guess one of my favorite parts of running this business is being able to give back in a way that, especially over this last year where, jobs security has not been what it has been in the past. It allows me to still be able to give back to my community in a way that, personally, sometimes I'm not able to. So if you if you're interested about learning more about that, I have a page on my website. It's henliahandmade.com/values that shares more about the details of that. And I also keep a tally of how much I've donated since I launched my business. So you can go there if you're interested in finding out more about that. But the yarn that Teresa chose to use for her design Late Harvest, which is really beautiful, and I love what she did with it so much. Like she mentioned, it is a Rambouillet, and I'll just show it to you here. Well, if you can, yeah, the details might be a little hard to see, but it's a 2-ply worsted weight, 100% US Rambouillet wool, and it's soft. It's really bouncy. It's really fun to knit with. Like Teresa said, it's just has a little bit of grip to it, which is nice. And I've really enjoyed getting to know this yarn over the last year and a half or so. The colorway was actually designed as part of my at-home collection, which I released in the fall, and the colorway is called Enchanting Fall. It's like just about every one of the colorways that I've designed, it was named, or it was inspired by basically what I see outside my window. So at the time, the leaves were starting to change color, and I just really wanted to capture that beauty in the form of yarn. I just love to take what I see in nature and translate it into something that I can knit with. So there's purples, reds, oranges, a little bit of gray popping through. And in case you're interested, the natural dyes that I used for this, the reds and the oranges and kind of the tan color that you see is madder root, and the purple here is cochineal. And cochineal is interesting because it's actually an insect that lives on the prickly pear cactus. And when I receive them, obviously I can't grow those myself. I receive them as tiny little dried insects, and I grind them up in a dedicated coffee bean grinder and cook them up. They smell terrible when you're cooking on the stove. My husband hates cochineal cooking day, but they make, oh my goodness, such beautiful colors: pinks, purples, reds. It's a really fun dye to work with. And I do try to grow as many of my own dyes as possible. I'm located in Central Oregon, a high desert. We have a very short growing season, so I do the best with what I have. And I'm also honing my gardening skills as well. So until I can get a greenhouse where I can grow more of my dyes, I try to source as sustainably as and ethically as possible. So in fact, one of my suppliers is located in Portland, Oregon, and she definitely focuses on the sustainability, and I really appreciate that about my suppliers. So I opened my virtual doors to Henley Handmade in August of 2019, and business was kind of slow to begin with because there's so many beautiful, incredible dyers out there, and so it's hard to really kind of separate this. But when and the beginning of 2020, when everything shut down, my business did start picking up, but it's hard to really determine if that was just sort of natural growth pattern of a new business, or if it had anything to do with everybody staying at home. I did receive emails from customers that specifically stated that they had chosen to use their allotted yarn money to support my business that particular month, which was really, really nice. And it's a really incredible feeling to know that the community is really reaching out and doing what they can, even if it's a small part, to support those of us who are running these small businesses. And looking at it from the perspective of receiving emails from customers, I guess the pandemic did play a part for me. And then of course, more people staying home, having more time to knit. That also played a big part in my business this last year as well. And I did notice a lot of growth. Again, is it new business growth or pandemic growth? So yeah, it's a little hard to determine. I think they probably just both played together quite well. But as a part-time business, this I'm very happy with where I'm at. I've got two young children at home that I'm also raising, so that takes up a whole bunch of my time too. I guess I'm grateful for Teresa reaching out to me. Thank you, Teresa, for sending me that note on Etsy. At that time, I don't think I had my website up and running yet, so that was really the only place that she could have found me. So yeah, it's been an interesting time, but I don't know, maybe it was a good time to start a business too. So yeah, if we're gonna leave questions to the end, I mean, I can open it up to questions now, or we
I
can
have a
leave them all.
question.
Yeah.
So you talked about your natural dyes and your suppliers for those, and dyeing with natural materials and sustainable materials, but you also mentioned domestic wool, and it does say that on your site that you make your yarn from traceable wool. Can you talk a little bit about what that means, and if that sourcing was impacted at all by COVID?
Yeah, so yeah, that's really good questions, because there's quite a community of indie dyers, and I know that a lot of dyers were impacted greatly by a shortage of yarn in this last year, because so many dyers source their yarn internationally. I was very fortunate that my supplier was not impacted at all, because so my supplier, I don't have a problem sharing this, is Mountain Meadow Wool, and they spin the yarn for me, and they get all of their yarn from the ranches like right down the road from them. So there's several different ranches in Wyoming that they get their wool from, but it didn't impact their businesses at all because, you know, they're all outside just doing their thing just like any other day. And fortunately the mill was able to keep running safely. So so yeah, so it didn't impact my ability to get my yarn at all, which was really great. And as far as traceability goes, on each cone of yarn that I get, it actually tells me which ranch the wool comes from. So I'd have to go grab my cones to be able to tell you which ranch this came from. But yeah, I mean, I know exactly which ranches supply my yarn, which is really, really cool.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Great answer. Appreciate it. Don't have any questions in the chat, but I do just want to say for anyone that is watching, feel free to comment or question in the chat as we go along. And sorry, Tressa, you go now.
Oh, no. So I think I'll move on to, why don't I spotlight a couple of the patterns for some of the dyers who aren't here real quick, just kind of, we can run through some of what else is in the book. Sorry, I'm looking at photos. Okay. Let's look at, actually, these are fun. So there we go. Okay, so these mitts are called, I think it's Give Me Your Answer Do. Is what they actually, yes, Give Me Your Answer Do. And the yarn is from Abstract Fiber. And in the fairly early in the spring, I think it was, Fuchsia hosted Lori, who runs Abstract Fibers, and she did a kind of a virtual studio tour. And she was talking about her dye process and where she gets her inspirations for colorways. And she told this absolutely darling story to grandparents, whose names escape me at the moment, but one of them is her grandmother was named Daisy. And the upshot of the story is that her grandfather ended up outside her grandmother's door singing a bicycle made for two. And I thought that was just the sweetest story. And so I wanted to make something with that colorway. So this colorway is called, sorry, this will take me just a second. This colorway is called Harry and Daisy. So I wanted to do something with that colorway. And I went through my stitch dictionaries and I found this little daisy motif. So it's a pair of mitts covered in daisies, inspired by that lovely story that Lori told about her grandparents. So that's one of the patterns. Let's see what else is good in here. Let's look at, so this is, oops, there we go. This is called The Scent of the Sea. And this yarn is from Driftwood Farms. And she's located on the southern Oregon coast. And she was kind of telling me about where she lives and her process. And she was talking about how much inspiration she takes from just where she lives, that she can hear the ocean from where she lives. She can smell the ocean from where she lives. And so I very quickly got this idea that I wanted to create a shawl that was about the ocean. So this pattern is called The Scent of the Sea, and it uses two of her yarns to create this wave pattern. The white is actually a mohair, so it's kind of frothy, like the white caps on the ocean. So that was another one. So I'm going to go ahead and, am I back? So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the shawl that is the big one in the book. It's called Berry Patch. And there's Berry Patch. So towards the end of getting everything organized for the book, I had kind of a last minute, one of my dyers dropped out. So I had one slot open. I put out a call. I got an email from Leanne of Silver Falls Fiber Company. And she introduced herself, and I really liked her yarn, and I was all set to work with her. And I got another email from a friend of hers, Tony, saying, "Hey, Leanne told me you were looking for dyers, and and she would be interested in also participating." And so I had this kind of conundrum. I had one slot left, but I had two dyers who were interested, but they were friends. They knew each other and they worked together. In fact, one of the things that got mentioned was that they sometimes dye yarn together. And I thought, well, why don't I just do something big, use yarn from both of them, highlight that friendship aspect, blend the yarns together. And this is what I came up with. Um, I've been kind of interested lately in ways in which different yarns, especially different color yarns, can be blended together. And I know it's sort of obvious, but it is very much inspired by the BLM movement and what happened here in Portland over the summer. I'm really interested in kind of tapping into this notion that we as a society work better when we can blend together and highlight each other's strengths and support each other's weaknesses. And I've been putting a lot of that into my knitting lately. If you're knitting the Rose City Yarn Crawl knit along, um, that's all about color blending. You'll notice that there's no one foreground and background color. It keeps switching back and forth. And it was very much a metaphor for the idea that we can't have dominant and subordinate anymore. We've got to put everything on an equal footing. So anyway, but back to this shawl. If you look closely, you'll see that it's actually two semi-solid greens, a dark green and a light green, and then two variegateds that kind of overlay on top of it. And I just love the way you get the blending. No one yarn pops out by itself. Everything is kind of blended together. And that was definitely what I was aiming for. So I'm going to go ahead and let Leanne talk about her business and her friendship with Tony and how they make yarn.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I want to start first by thanking Jen and Fuchsia and of course Teresa for the opportunity to do this and participate in this project. My name is Leanne Blakeney, and I'm the sole proprietress of Silver Falls Fiber Company in the beautiful Willamette Valley. I'm in Silverton, Oregon. I live on a farm that is a multi-generational farm that my grandparents homesteaded. My mother still lives on the farm. I live in downtown Silverton, but I am on the farm quite often, and that truly, the beautiful place that I live is the inspiration for everything that I do when it comes to fiber related projects. Like so many of us, my grandmother taught me to knit when I was just a little girl. My mother still has the first project I ever made, which was it is something truly only a mother could love. It's a scarf that's about 9 feet long and has holes in it that you could fit your entire torso through. But I did make that for my mom. And that was sort of the start of my knitting career. So I've been knitting for a very long time. When I was in high school and then again in college, I spent some time living in Norway. And it's a cold country there, and I spent a winter there. And I can tell you that they knit all the time, that the Norwegians knit all the time because they have to keep themselves warm, frankly. So that was really, that experience really upped my knitting game. And I came back really a very committed knitter. Since then, I've expanded my repertoire, so I spin as well and enjoy that and try to spin a little bit every day if I can. And of course, the dyeing now too has sort of taken over a big chunk of my attention and time. I have been dyeing for a number of years now and really enjoy that process. And was enjoying it so much that I asked my friend Tony Young to come over and dye in the backyard with me. And we made quite an afternoon of it and fixed some lunch, put out tables, had the materials ready to go. And it turned out that she enjoyed it far more than I thought she would, as a matter of fact. And she is very inspired by color. And so she, for about the last 2 years now, has had her own business as well called Butterfly Fibers. So we do get together and dye sometimes. It's a lot of fun to do that because otherwise it can be a very solitary project. And so we really do find a lot of inspiration by getting together and sort of just working on different colors. Which is why this was all so much fun for us to come up with Berry Patch. And that was actually the very colors that we came up with. It's we were doing this in the middle of the summer when the Willamette Valley is literally bursting with different kinds of berries. And, you know, you name it, we grow it here. And so that's exactly where the colors for this shawl came from. Tony dyed the variegated yarn, I dyed the solid, and that's typical of what we enjoy doing. I am interested in different things than Tony's interested in. So yes, we have our own businesses, but we also continue to have a friendship and can do that okay because we are interested in very different things. Our palettes are not the same. We're interested in different colors. Our fiber preferences are different. And so it just works for us. So here's some examples. I wanted to make sure that these were here. These were other colors that we had submitted to Teresa in the form of pictures so that she could kind of choose among them. So you can see directly the berry patch inspiration that we had. This is the variegated, so it includes all the colors. You know, here are ripe berries, here are stems, here are leaves, you name it, we've got it here in the Willamette Valley. So I know one of the things that Teresa wanted us to talk about was how our businesses are adapting to the pandemic, which has been a challenge for everyone. Tony has a site for butterfly fibers on Etsy. And I have not yet done that. You can certainly find me on Ravelry under Silver Falls Fiber. But we do have big plans, the two of us, and we hope to be coming to city, town, and neighborhood near you very soon. And with that, I think I'll close.
Cool. So you want me to talk about a few more designs, Fuchsia? I think we have no word from Stefania yet, right?
Yeah, Stefania of Three Fates was supposed to join us, but I haven't seen her and schedule's been weird this weekend. So we can just go on. Okay. Thanks, Leanne, for that. I have a couple questions, but we can just trudge along and I can circle back.
Okay, well, I think what I will do is I will go ahead and talk about the design that I made for, this is Three Fates yarn, and Stefania, who hopefully was going to join us, but apparently got tied up. But her yarn I had worked with before, so she was one of the first dyers that I contacted to see if she'd be interested in this, and she was. She's known for her just really rich, saturated semi-solids. And I had been playing with some ideas for wanting to use mini skeins in a shawl, but in a way where you use them equally. So, you know, usually when you're knitting a shawl, you start with a small piece of the shawl. And as you get bigger and bigger, the rows get longer and longer. And so the stripe of color gets shorter because it's a longer row. And so you're still using the same amount of yarn, but it doesn't look even in the shawl. So I wanted to come up with something where you actually had blocks of color that visually looked like the same size. And this was a really good match for Three Fates yarn because in her day job, Stefania is a sustainability advisor for the community college down in Salem. And she has a lot of interest in sustainability, social justice, equality, inclusion, all these things. So I created this design with these equally sized blocks of color, and it's called Balance. And it's certainly something we can all use in our lives. So that's an example of a way in which I actually drew inspiration from the person, even though it doesn't directly tie into her dyeing technique. It's more about what her values were that inspired this particular shawl. And I'm always a fan of patterns that use up those lovely little mini skeins and or your leftover bits. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in the book that I just really want to show off. Let me see. Let's do this one, because this one is also about that color blending that I was talking about earlier. This is yarn from Knitted Wit here in the Portland area. And I think most of you are probably familiar with Knitted Wit. She's been around for a long time. Beautiful, beautiful yarns. And they're also a group effort. Knitted Wit has grown to the point where they have a couple of people working to. So I'm trying to think. Got a couple of primaries and then and some employees. So they are definitely a group effort. And I wanted to do something again that highlighted that idea of collaboration. So you can see in this design, one color is dominant on one end of the cowl and then fades into the other color, which then becomes dominant at the other end. And I think, you know, a lot of collaborations work that way, where for some parts of it, one of the people is dominant, and then for other aspects of the business or whatever the collaboration is, the other person is dominant. So that was the idea behind this one, and I love their yarns. Beautiful colors. Let's see. The variegated yarn is one of their national park yarns, which was particularly close to my heart since I actually wrote a book called Knitting Wild, which was inspired by national parks and wildlife refuges. So that was another nice thing to get to use one of their national park yarns. So I think I am more or less done.
Great. Thanks for sharing all those great photos and talking all about your process and the very well-timed book for knitting at home, I guess.
I was not planning to knit write 2 books in 2 years. That was not the original plan.
Well,
there it is.
Needed, and I think we're all ready for some new patterns. And I love your story about like actually going out and seeking out, you know, other dyers in Oregon that you maybe, you know, weren't familiar with yet. I think like reaching out and looking for people that you may not necessarily, you know about is just a really good thing we probably all could do more of. And I definitely tried to do more of that too myself this year, and I think we'll continue this year. I love the community that we have in Oregon for like, we are just very crafty, fibery people, fiber loving people. I think, you know, Mindy and Leanne definitely exemplified that. And I just want to say that if people want to go ahead and unmute now, you know, we can go ahead and just chat. If you have any specific questions, go ahead and ask. I had a couple questions for Leanne and Mindy, if you don't mind. You guys are just so knowledgeable about what you do, and I wanted to ask if either of you had any recommendations for books or resources for people that are interested in learning about dyeing or learning about fiber.
You know, I started out dyeing with another friend of mine. That's like I learned to knit. That's how I learned to dye. That's how I learned to spin. I learned from someone else who was willing to spend time with me and teach me. And it was a group event. It was a party in somebody's backyard. And that's the best way to do it, I think. I mean, because I've taught other people to knit, and what I've always said to them is that's all knitters want is more people to knit with. That's all we want. And I think the same is true for spinners. I think the same is true for dyers. We want it to be a community, fun, lively, and event that we get to put our love into that product. That said, there are lots of great books available, and I checked out lots out just from the library. Frankly, our libraries are such a resource that I think it's pretty outstanding what we can find there. And I checked out a lot and looked at a lot and enjoyed every one of them. So I couldn't pinpoint one. It's just there's a lot of information available.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything Leanne just said. The only thing that I think I could add is if you're interested specifically in natural dyes, there are a number of great books out there. I don't remember who it's by off the top of my head, but there's a book called The Modern Natural Dyer. And that is a great place to start because it's very, there's lots of beautiful pictures and some really good basic instructions on how to get started. And then of course, there's lots of technical information in terms of natural dyeing has been done for, since the beginning of time almost. So there's just tons and tons of resources out there. It's just sifting through to find the ones that speak to you and are most, oh, thank you, Fuchsia, for finding that for me. Oh yeah, it looks like you guys even carry that. That's perfect. Yeah, sifting through to find the information that makes most sense to your brain. There's very scientific books and very visual pictorial books, and you just have to start playing with what you have. Onion skins, great place to start. Avocados, skins, pits, fun things to start with too. So you can just start playing.
I love that. Yeah. So if anyone doesn't have the chat open, if you go ahead and go in there, I just shared The Modern Natural Dyer, which is the book that Mindy was just talking about. The author is Christine Behar, who's the owner of A Verb for Keeping Warm and Yarn Shop in Oakland. And she actually is going to be speaking at the Puddletown Knitters Guild this month too. If anyone here is a member of the Puddletown Knitters Guild, they have been doing online events with various speakers, and so that's just a timely mention. Thought I would share that if anyone wants to check that out. And we actually are doing an event with Teresa in March. Rose City Yarn Crawl is a Portland-based yarn crawl that the local yarn shops here do every year. And speaking about COVID affecting businesses, for the first time ever, they have moved to a virtual space. So Teresa is going to have an online trunk show with us. She will also be signing books in store, and we will also be open in store, but the crawl is all online now. Just want to let you guys know about that. And it runs March 4th through March 14th. And I will also put a link to pre-order Knitting at Home in the chat. And when you pre-order it, it'll be available for in-store pickup starting during Yarn Crawl, and as well as shipping. When you pre-order your copy, you can get it signed by Teresa. And if you have a little message, just when you place your order, you know what you want her, who you want her to sign it to. My other question I had for Leanne actually was, I shared a link to Henlea Handmade's website, but I didn't know if you had somewhere you wanted us to go and check out Silver Falls.
Well, you know, I do have a domain name, but I have not populated my website yet. But you can find me on Ravelry under Silver Falls Fiber.
Okay, I'll see if I can find that. And then Butterfly Fiber, do you know their Etsy handle?
I think it's Butterfly Fiber is what Tony's store is. And truthfully, I had a little trouble finding it myself when I looked for it. But so make sure that you put in shop/Butterfly Fiber, and that then took me directly to her.
I think I found it.
Okay.
Oh, thanks, Jen. So Jen just shared Silver Falls on Ravelry, and I'm putting Butterfly Fiber, Etsy in the chat.
I should add that for each of the patterns, I also include information about the dyer. So there's a biography of each dyer and their contact information, including their website, where their Etsy shop, if that's what they have, or their website. And I have to tell you, it sort of cracked me up. I've been sending out copies to the Kickstarter donors and to my test knitters. And I got the nicest email back from one of my test knitters when the book arrived. She just gushed over it and said, I've already spent money. So when you get the book, you'll be able to track down all of these really cool dyers who participated.
We're also doing a little pretty sunstone stitch marker with every pre-order.
Which I don't know if I hold this close enough, if you can see. So sunstone is the Oregon State stone. So it seemed appropriate. So you'll get one of these little stitch markers if you pre-order.
Just added the link to the pre-orders in the chat. And got all the other ones in there.
And I don't know if you're ready to talk about this or not, but I know you've been working with some of the dyers on putting kits together. Do you have information about who we're going to have kits from?
Yeah, so I've been slowly reaching out, looking for kits for the book. And so some of the patterns in here will have kits available, very limited amounts during Yarn Crawl. So far we have kits knitted with will be available starting March 4th. Abstract fiber, 3 Fates yarn, and possibly a few others. So just keep an eye out. There'll be some surprises, hopefully. And anyone have any other questions for any of the dyers or Teresa? No questions. Is anyone knitting anything they want to share? We have a room full of knitters. I definitely resonated when Leanne said that's like all we're looking for are more and more knitters. I'm always trying to convert my non-knitter friends to knitters.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's what I tell my husband when once upon a time when I used to actually teach in person. And I used to head out of the house to go do learn to knit classes. I'd say, I'm off to make new knitters.
Yeah. I'm actually knitting Teresa's Yarn Crawl mystery knit.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great.
And before that, it was berry patch. So
yes,
Teresa keeps me busy.
I'll share. I'll go and share the link to the mystery knit along too. So the Rose City Yarn Crawl mystery knit along is another Yarn Crawl annual event, and Teresa is the designer for this year's.
I'm working on her Kaluga, I can't pronounce it, Kaluga Canals hat from the Knitting Wild book. Actually, the second one that I'm making right now when I listen to this.
Nice. We also do carry a couple of Teresa's other books too, Crescents and Knitting Wild.
And I'll have samples available at in person. If you do make it into the shop, I'll have samples from everything available to look at and fondle.
Teresa, you need to slow down with your books. I can't knit everything in them before I get the next one.
Yeah, well, let me out of my house and I'll slow down.
I mean, I did everything but one out of Knitting Wild, and I've only done one so far out of Crescent, so I'm behind.
All right, found the pattern. Sorry, it took me a little while. There it is in the chat.
Yeah, it's going well. We're into clue 3 at this point, but people are catching up who start late.
I'm only on clue 2.
You'll catch, I'm sure.
Yeah. Also, I messed up, and I have too few stitches on one of my needles, and I'm like, dang it! But I'm not going to go back and fix it. I'm just going to add them in.
Yeah.
I have a few too many. I'll swap with you.
There we go. There we go. Let's do that. Yep. I'm teaching too many classes right now. I'm trying to knit when I'm practically blind by the time I get in to rest at night, and that's probably not a good thing to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe that could be your next book, Teresa, Knitting Blind. Knitting with our mushy.
Knitting feel. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Knitting with our mushy at-home brains.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thanks all for sharing. I really appreciate you all being here. And if anyone wants to rewatch this or share it, you know, this is a free event, and everyone here was kind enough to let us record. So we'll send out the recording, and I'm going to send it to all the speakers, and please, speakers, go ahead and share it with your newsletters if you'd like. I think there was definitely some great content in here that people will appreciate. All those people watching the Super Bowl right now. They're
No.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you. For listening.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.